My name is Luna Mason, and I was 33 the year I learned what a combination lockbox clamped to a gas meter actually means for a family. My grandmother Beatrice turned 80 on a Tuesday in November. She set the dining room table herself, 8 ceramic plates aligned on a vintage lace tablecloth. A vanilla sheet cake sat in the center with pink frosting roses sweating under the Missouri heat. Nobody came. My parents, Susan and Richard, were skiing in Aspen. My brother Julian did not call. My mother posted a photo to the family group chat of her designer ski goggles reflecting the mountain snow with the caption, "Blessed." I drove 40 minutes from my apartment in St. Louis after my shift as a hospital compliance auditor. I found her sitting alone at the head of the long table. The wax from the unlit candles had dripped into the icing. The lace was stained pink. She looked up when I walked in and asked if I was there for the estate sale. I cut her a slice of cake. I sang. The next morning, while I was taking out the trash, I found the metal box hidden in her azalea bushes. 10 minutes later, a black sedan pulled into the driveway, and 2 strangers handed me a sealed manila folder signed in my grandmother's own handwriting. What happened next hit like a storm, and no one saw it coming. Welcome back to Revenge Order, where ordinary people use fine print to dismantle loud entitlement. Tell me your age and where you are listening from in the comments, and hit subscribe. That November evening is burned into my memory like a brand. I had left the hospital, still wearing my badge lanyard and Navy scrubs. The drive to Chesterfield took longer than usual with the highway traffic, but I made it to her gravel driveway just before sunset. The house felt too quiet. The porch light was burned out. When I stepped inside, the smell of lemon polish and stale sugar hit my chest. Beatrice was wearing her Sunday dress. A wool cardigan hung off her shoulders. She traced the edge of a ceramic plate with her thumb. She did not cry. Crying was for people who still expected things to get better. She just stared at the empty chairs. "Luna," she said my name quiet and flat. "Did Susan call you?" I lied and said the cell reception in Aspen was bad. Beatrice nodded. She knew a lie when she heard one. We ate our cake in silence. The frosting tasted like shortening and disappointment. I helped her up the wooden stairs at 9. Her bones felt like bird wings under my hands. As I pulled the quilt over her chest, her eyes caught the hallway light. They were not cloudy. They were sharp. "Watch the doors, Luna," she whispered. "They think I am already gone." I did not sleep well. The guest room draft kept waking me up. By 7 the next morning, I was downstairs clearing the dining room. I scraped the ruined cake into the trash and folded the stained lace tablecloth. The humidity was already rising when I carried the black plastic bags out the side door toward the curb. I had to squeeze past the overgrown azalea bushes lining the brick foundation. My hip brushed the branches. Metal clinked against the iron gas pipe. I stopped. I pushed the pink flowers aside. Clamped tight around the rusty pipe was a heavy gray padlock with a numbered dial. A real estate lockbox. You do not place a combination key box on a utility meter unless strangers are coming to walk through your home. My stomach dropped. The house was paid off. Beatrice had lived here for 40 years. Someone was staging tours while she sat inside watching television. I ran my thumb over the cold metal dials. The numbers were set to 0. Gravel crunched at the end of the driveway. I dropped the branches and stepped back. A sleek black sedan idled near the mailbox. The engine cut. The front doors opened in unison. A woman in a tailored gray suit stepped out, holding a thick manila folder. A man with a zippered leather pouch followed her. They did not look up at the roof or check the address numbers. They walked straight toward me with the focused pace of people executing a legal maneuver. The woman stopped 3 feet away. Her eyes flicked to the gas meter behind the bushes, then back to my face. "Luna Mason?" she asked. Her voice carried no warmth, just procedure. I nodded. "My name is Evelyn Cole," she said. "I am an estate attorney. Your grandmother retained my firm 14 months ago. She asked me to deliver this to you personally the moment a lockbox appeared on this property." She held out the folder. Across the wax seal was Beatrice's signature, sharp, looping cursive, written by a woman who knew exactly what her children were planning to steal. I took the heavy envelope from Evelyn Cole. The thick manila stock felt rough against my palms. The red wax seal holding the flap shut bore the imprint of a thumb. My grandmother had pressed her own hand into the hot wax to ensure no one opened this before it reached me. Evelyn did not offer a comforting smile. Her posture remained rigid. She was an officer of the court, executing a precise, tactical maneuver. Beatrice came to my office last August, she said. She arrived alone in a taxi. She paid my retainer in cash and drafted a specific set of instructions. I was to hold this file until a lockbox materialized on her property. She knew her children would eventually move to liquidate her assets, and she wanted the legal architecture in place before her cognitive decline could be used against her. I stared at the sealed envelope. My heart hammered against my ribs. "You knew they were trying to sell the house?" I asked. Evelyn adjusted the strap of her leather briefcase. "I know what the documents in my vault dictate. My ethical obligation is to my client, and my client instructed me to hand you the keys to her defense. Do not confront your parents today. Do not send an angry text. They do not know this envelope exists. Let them continue to operate in the dark until you understand exactly what you are holding." Without waiting for a response, she turned around and walked back to the idling black sedan. The notary followed her in silence. The car reversed down the gravel driveway and disappeared onto the main road, leaving me alone with the morning humidity and a folder that held the fate of my family. I walked back inside the quiet house. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked a steady, rhythmic beat. I moved into the dining room and sat down at the table. The vintage lace was still stained pink from the melted cake frosting. I placed the folder in the center of the table, right where the ruined dessert had been. I slid my fingernail under the flap and broke the wax seal. It snapped with a dry, hollow sound. I pulled out a stack of crisp legal pages bound by black binder clips. Because I spend my days auditing hospital compliance records, I know how to read a contract. I know where the trap doors are buried. I spread the documents across the lace tablecloth. The first stack was a recorded deed and a revocable living trust. The header read, "The Beatrice Mason Family Trust, dated 14 months ago." I scanned the clauses. Beatrice had legally transferred ownership of the house out of her personal name and into the protection of the trust. She named herself as the primary trustee. Then I read the successor clause. Upon her incapacitation, full legal control of the trust and the property transferred directly to me. Not my father Richard, not my mother Susan. The house belonged to the trust, and the trust belonged to me. The second document was a durable power of attorney. The bold print named Luna Mason as the sole agent for all financial and healthcare decisions. The durability clause was the most critical weapon on the page. It meant my authority did not evaporate if Beatrice lost her memory. It activated. The third document was the shield that made the first two bulletproof. It was a formal evaluation letter, printed on the letterhead of a prominent St. Louis neurologist. Dr. Linwood had examined Beatrice on the exact day she signed the trust. The clinical notes were precise. The patient demonstrates a pristine understanding of her assets and her family dynamics. She possesses the requisite mental capacity to execute binding legal instruments. My grandmother had engineered a flawless legal fortress. She knew the moment her mind began to fade, her children would circle like vultures. She stripped them of their power before they even knew the war had started. Clipped to the very back of the folder was a piece of ivory stationery. The handwriting was sharp and deliberate in blue ink. Luna. When they try to take it, use this. Seeing that blue ink pulled me backward in time. The air in the dining room suddenly felt 20 years older. I was 12 again, sitting at this exact mahogany table. Beatrice had spread her leather checkbook and a stack of utility bills across the polished wood. She handed me a calculator and a sharpened pencil. My brother Julian was outside playing basketball. My parents were attending a country club mixer they could not afford. I was tasked with finding a missing $40 in the monthly ledger. I remember crying in frustration because the numbers kept shifting every time I ran the tape. Beatrice did not coddle me. She poured me a glass of ice water and tapped the paper. "Dry your eyes, Luna," she said. "Tears do not balance the sheet. Go line by line. Numbers do not lie. People do. People will smile at you while they empty your pockets. If you know the math, you know the truth." She had chosen me because I was the only person in the family who understood the math. My father, Richard, spent his life dodging conflict. My mother, Susan, viewed wealth as a divine right and treated debt as a temporary inconvenience. Julian inherited their worst traits, believing the world owed him a living. Beatrice knew they would view her home not as a sanctuary, but as a sudden injection of unearned cash. My phone buzzed against the table, vibrating against the mahogany. The screen lit up with a new message in the family group chat. It was my mother. Susan had uploaded a new photograph from Aspen. She was posing near a stone fireplace, holding a ceramic mug of spiked cocoa. Her ski gear was pristine and expensive. The caption below the image read, "Soaking in the mountain peace, feeling so blessed today." A cold clarity washed through my veins. Susan was not just an absent daughter taking a luxury vacation while her mother sat alone on a milestone birthday. She was waiting. The lockbox on the gas meter proved they were actively moving pieces on the board. They were smiling in Aspen while paying someone to walk buyers through Beatrice's living room. They needed Beatrice to slip deep enough into dementia so they could declare her incompetent and seize the title. I pushed my chair back from the table. If a realtor was touring the house, there had to be a paper trail left behind. Real estate agents leave business cards. They leave staging notes. I began systematically searching the main floor. I checked the hallway credenza. I flipped through the mail pile on the console table. Nothing. I walked into the kitchen and opened the junk drawer next to the refrigerator. It was a tangled mess of rubber bands, expired takeout menus, and loose batteries. I dug my fingers into the back corner and felt the crisp edge of heavy printer paper. I pulled it out. It was a standard Missouri residential purchase agreement. The pages were folded in half and shoved out of sight. I smoothed the document flat on the granite counter. The seller signature line was blank. The buyer line listed a corporate entity named Apex Horizon Holdings, LLC. The purchase price was typed clearly in the center of the page, $450,000. Cash offer, as is condition. My lungs tightened. Similar homes in Chesterfield were selling for $600,000. The buyer was getting a $150,000 discount for a quiet, off-market cash transaction. Someone was trying to steal a massive chunk of equity in the dark. I skipped down to the final page to check the timeline. The closing date was typed in bold, black ink. The transaction was scheduled to finalize in exactly 14 days. I had 2 weeks to figure out who was behind Apex Horizon Holdings and how my parents planned to sign a deed they did not legally own. I laid the unsigned purchase agreement flat on the cool granite countertop. My day job requires tracking phantom billing codes through labyrinthine hospital databases. Finding a hidden real estate transaction required the exact same forensic muscle. I opened my laptop and connected to the residential wireless network. I did not bother checking the popular public housing websites. A price tag that low meant this was a shadow transaction. I logged into a county property tax portal and cross-referenced the parcel identification number with the regional broker database. It took me less than 20 minutes to breach the privacy wall. The property was an off-market pocket listing. Wealthy networks use these whisper campaigns to sell assets quietly behind closed doors, preventing neighbors from asking questions. The listing agent was Patricia Sterling. My mother played mixed doubles with Patricia at the Chesterfield Country Club every Thursday morning. The circle was tight and fiercely protective of its own secrets. I stared at the glowing screen. The asking price was typed in stark black digits. $450,000. The theft was laid bare right in front of me. They were using a country club ally to push a quiet sale well below the true valuation. I needed Susan on the record. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed the Aspen number. The line rang 4 times before connecting. The background noise bled through the tiny speaker. Clinking glassware, a crackling fire, the low hum of affluent vacationers celebrating fresh snow. Susan answered with a bright melodic tone. "Luna, darling," she chirped, "we are just sitting down for après-ski. The mountain is pristine today." I kept my breathing slow and my voice entirely neutral. I did not want to trigger her defensive instincts. I told her I was at the house taking care of a few chores and casually mentioned finding the padlock on the gas meter. The melodic vacation tone evaporated instantly. Her register dropped into a soothing, patronizing cadence. It was the specific voice she used when managing a difficult child or a confused store clerk. "Oh, that old thing," she sighed. "That is just a preventative appraisal, sweetheart. Your father and I are just getting ahead of the estate planning. You know how confused your grandmother gets these days. We need to establish a baseline value for her future care requirements." Susan did not stop talking to let me process the lie. She deployed a classic deflection tactic. She pivoted to a financial complaint to cast herself as the stressed victim. "The banks are behaving like pirates right now," she grumbled. "Your father and I just pulled a home equity line of credit for the new kitchen renovations, and the nightmare interest rates are criminal. It is stressing your father out to no end. We are carrying so much weight for this family." I filed that detail away in the back of my mind. A home equity line of credit. They were borrowing heavy debt against their own pristine suburban property while vacationing in a Colorado ski resort. People who are swimming in liquid cash do not complain about interest rates on home improvement loans. To a compliance auditor, a sudden leveraged debt is a glaring red flag. My parents were bleeding money somewhere else and using their primary residence as a bandage. Before I could analyze their debt ratio, Susan shifted her tactics again. She offered false comfort. "We are handling everything for Beatrice," she promised. "I want you to look on the kitchen counter by the toaster. I left a glossy brochure there for you to review. It is called Oakwood Luxury Assisted Living. We are securing a beautiful transition suite for her. She will be pampered every single day, Luna. You do not need to worry your pretty head about any of this." She ended the call with a quick reminder to lock the front door when I left. I set my phone down and walked over to the toaster oven. A thick, heavy stock pamphlet rested against the ceramic backsplash. I picked it up. The paper felt expensive. The cover featured high-definition photography of manicured gardens and silver-haired seniors holding watercolor paintbrushes. I carried the pamphlet into the living room and sank into the upholstery of the floral sofa. For the next 3 hours, I researched Oakwood Luxury Assisted Living on my laptop. The facility boasted 5-star ratings across multiple healthcare directories. The amenities included private chefs, garden courtyards, and round-the-clock specialized nursing staff. The monthly fee was staggering. It was an enclave for the ultra-wealthy. A dangerous sense of relief washed over my skin. My shoulders dropped. The tight knot in my chest loosened. I rationalized their greed sitting there in the quiet living room. I told myself that even if Susan and Richard were stealing the equity from the house, they were at least spending the remainder to keep Beatrice safe. They were securing a resort-style sanctuary for her final years. I let my guard down. The psychological exhaustion of always suspecting your own blood takes a toll. I wanted to believe my family was not entirely devoid of a moral compass. I convinced myself that the off-market sale was just their clumsy way of funding this luxury care without depleting their own country club lifestyle. The tension in the house felt lower. I went to sleep that night thinking the worst of the storm had passed. That false comfort lasted exactly until the following morning. I was organizing the paperwork scattered across the desk in the small den. Beatrice kept a physical calendar to track her upcoming doctor appointments and social club meetings. I flipped through the pages to see if she had any cardiology visits scheduled for the upcoming week. Tucked between the heavy paper pages was a folded carbon copy receipt. It was not a deposit confirmation for Oakwood Luxury Assisted Living. It was a photocopied legal document. I smoothed the wrinkled edges and read the heading. My relief turned into pure ice. The Oakwood brochure was a deliberate decoy. My mother had planted it on the counter to keep me docile and unquestioning while she executed the real plan in the shadows. The document in my hand proved they were not sending Beatrice to a luxury resort. They were setting a trap, and I was about to uncover the exact weapon they used to spring it. The wrinkled carbon paper felt rough against my fingertips. I carried it over to the bay window to catch the morning sunlight. The header, typed in bold courier font, confirmed my worst fear. It was a durable power of attorney. The designated agent was Richard Mason. The date stamped at the bottom margin was exactly 21 days old. I laid the photocopy next to the original trust documents Evelyn Cole had delivered. Side by side, the contrast told a horrifying story. 14 months earlier, Beatrice had signed the trust with a fountain pen. Her signature was a masterclass in penmanship. The letters flowed with deep pressure and fluid confidence. The capital initials swept upward with unmistakable intent. The signature on the recent photocopy looked like the erratic scratchings of a frightened child. The ink skipped across the dotted line. The letters were jagged and broken. The pen had lifted from the paper midway through her last name, leaving a gap where the flow should be. Whoever guided her hand had pressed too hard, dragging the ballpoint through the paper fiber. This was not the mark of a willing participant. This was a physical surrender. I walked back into the den and retrieved the spiral-bound calendar from her desk. I flipped the heavy pages backward to the previous month, tracing the grid with my index finger. 3 weeks ago, on a Tuesday, Susan had scribbled a hurried note in red ink. Emergency room trip. Suspected infection. My lungs turned to ice. In my line of work, you learn the physiological domino effect of common ailments. For a healthy 30-year-old, a urinary tract infection is a minor inconvenience cured by a short course of antibiotics. For an 80-year-old woman, it is a neurological grenade. The infection breaches the bloodstream and triggers profound acute delirium. The patient loses their anchor to reality. They experience vivid hallucinations, terrifying paranoia, and total cognitive collapse. I matched the date of the emergency room visit to the date printed on the fraudulent document. They were identical. My parents did not sit Beatrice down after Sunday dinner to discuss her estate. They waited until her brain was drowning in a toxic fever. They hovered over a hospital bed while she was trapped in a state of chemical dementia and shoved a pen into her trembling hand. They weaponized a medical crisis to bypass the ironclad trust she had built. I did not throw a glass against the wall. I did not collapse onto the floral sofa and weep. Panic is a luxury afforded to people who have a safety net. I had a deadline. A familiar, icy detachment flooded my chest. It is the same adrenaline drop I feel when a hospital administrator hands me a cooked ledger and smiles, expecting me to look the other way. They expect emotion. I deliver arithmetic. I walked out to my car and retrieved a hard plastic binder and a heavy-duty 3-hole punch from my work briefcase. I returned to the dining room, clearing away the breakfast dishes and wiping down the mahogany. I began constructing a timeline. I snapped the metal rings open. I inserted the real trust documents, the neurologist capacity letter, and the unsigned real estate contract. I slipped the photocopied forgery into a clear plastic sleeve. I labeled the index tabs with a fine point black marker. Every piece of paper was a nail in the coffin they were building for themselves. To destroy their fake authority, I needed undeniable proof of Beatrice's mental state on the day that pen touched the paper. I needed the clinical notes. I dialed the main line for the primary care clinic where Beatrice had been a patient for 2 decades. The phone buzzed against my ear. The hold music was a synthesized piano loop that grated on my nerves. I stared at the second hand on the grandfather clock, watching it slice through the morning silence. The music clicked off. A cheerful voice answered the line. St. Luke Senior Health, this is Brenda speaking. How may I direct your call? I kept my tone brisk and professional. Good morning, Brenda. This is Luna Mason calling on behalf of Beatrice Mason. Her date of birth is April 4th. I am acting as her designated healthcare proxy, and I need to request a digital copy of her emergency room discharge summary from 3 weeks ago. There was a familiar clatter of a keyboard through the receiver. Give me just a moment to pull her chart, Luna. We usually require a signed release form, but let me see what is on file. I waited. The silence stretched. The rhythmic typing abruptly stopped. When Brenda spoke again, the cheerful customer service pitch was gone. Her register was tight, guarded. "I am sorry," she said. Her voice dropped half an octave. "I am looking at the account now, and I cannot process this request." I frowned, pressing the phone closer to my ear. "I have a durable power of attorney, Brenda. I can email a certified copy to your compliance department right now." The receptionist lowered her voice further, sounding like someone reading a scripted legal warning. "I see a note on the file, Miss Mason. The primary agent updated the privacy protocols on this account 14 days ago. The chart is restricted." My fingers curled around the edge of the mahogany table. Who updated the protocols? "You know I cannot disclose unauthorized information," she replied. Her breathing sounded shallow over the digital connection. "All records regarding Beatrice Mason are strictly limited to Richard Mason." He placed a lock on the entire medical profile. "You are no longer an authorized contact. I have to terminate this call." The line went dead. A flat dial tone buzzed in my ear. I lowered the phone, setting it gently next to the binder. Richard had anticipated the audit. He knew the hospital discharge summary was the singular piece of evidence that would prove Beatrice lacked the legal capacity to sign his fake document. He had used the forged paper to seize control of her privacy rights, blinding me to her clinical reality. My father was a man who spent his entire career avoiding confrontation. He deferred every difficult conversation to my mother. But here in the shadows, he was moving with terrifying precision. He had built a bureaucratic wall around his crime. The grandfather clock chimed the top of the hour. The closing for the house was looming just days away. The buyer was standing by. The fake documents were locked in place. I could not fight a locked medical chart over a telephone. I needed to stare someone in the eye and force them to flinch. I grabbed my car keys off the kitchen island. I was going to the clinic. The drive to St. Luke's Senior Health took 12 minutes. I spent every second of it calculating my approach. You cannot bully clinical staff into breaking privacy laws. If you raise your voice in a medical facility, they will simply summon security and document your behavior as erratic. That is exactly the narrative my parents were trying to construct. I needed to be a ghost. I needed to move through the lobby, leaving no emotional footprint. I pulled into the sprawling asphalt lot. The late morning sun bounced off the rows of parked sedans. I found a spot near the back edge, far from the main glass doors. I gathered the black binder from the passenger seat, holding it tight against my ribs. I was 20 feet from the sliding automatic doors when I saw it. Parked illegally in a fire lane directly adjacent to the entrance was a silver crossover SUV. A St. Louis Cardinals decal was plastered on the rear windshield. A small dent marred the driver's side bumper. It was Richard's car. My pulse spiked, a sudden rush of cold adrenaline flooding my veins. He was supposed to be in Colorado drinking spiked cocoa by a stone fireplace. They had lied about the timeline of their vacation. He was here in Missouri, managing the fallout of his own crime. I ducked behind the concrete pillar of a handicap ramp. My breathing grew shallow. Through the glare of the glass lobby doors, I saw a familiar silhouette pacing near the pharmacy counter. Richard wore a golf polo and khaki slacks. His face was flushed red. He gripped his cell phone, pressing it hard against his ear. Even through the thick, insulated glass, I could see the rigid tension in his shoulders. He was jabbing his free hand in the air, dictating terms to whoever was on the other end of the line. I needed to get closer to hear the conversation, but I could not risk him spotting me. If Richard knew I was auditing the medical charts, he would expedite the closing immediately. I crept along the brick facade, slipping through a heavy metal door marked Emergency Exit. The stairwell was cool and smelled of industrial bleach. I cracked the door open half an inch, letting the ambient noise of the lobby filter into the concrete shaft. Richard paced right past my hiding spot, his loafers squeaking on the linoleum floor. His voice echoed off the high ceiling. "I do not care what the standard protocol is," he snapped. "The buyer is pushing the date up. I need those memory care transfer forms expedited by Friday. She is completely unmanageable at home. If you do not clear the medical transfer, the residential facility will not accept the deposit. Just push the paperwork through." He terminated the call without waiting for a response, shoving the phone into his pocket. He dragged a hand down his face, looking suddenly older than his 60 years. For a fleeting second, I saw the immense, crushing weight of the lie pressing down on him. Then he squared his shoulders, pushed through the sliding glass doors, and walked out to his illegally parked car. I waited until the silver crossover pulled out of the parking lot and merged onto the main road. I counted to 30. Then I pushed the heavy stairwell door open and stepped into the sterile, bright light of the lobby. The receptionist's desk was located behind a high counter of frosted glass. A woman wearing navy blue scrubs was sorting a stack of insurance claim forms. Her name tag read Brenda. She looked up as I approached, offering a weary customer service smile. "How can I help you today?" she asked. I did not introduce myself. I did not ask for permission. I opened the black binder and extracted 3 specific pages. The revocable living trust, the 14-month-old durable power of attorney, and the clinical capacity evaluation signed by the staff neurologist. I laid them flat on the frosted glass counter, turning the text to face her. "My name is Luna Mason," I said. My tone was flat, devoid of any pleading or hesitation. "I called earlier regarding the restricted chart for Beatrice Mason. I understand a recent privacy block was placed by Richard Mason." Brenda frowned, her hand hovering over her keyboard. "Miss Mason, I already explained on the phone. The primary agent locked the file. I am legally barred from releasing those records." I tapped my index finger against the bold header of the 14-month-old document. "Look at the execution date, Brenda. Look at the capacity letter attached to it. This legal instrument predates the paper Richard Mason submitted by over a year. The durability clause dictates that my authority supersedes any subsequent documents signed while the patient lacks cognitive baseline." Brenda read the highlighted paragraphs. Her weary smile vanished, replaced by the tense caution of a healthcare worker who realizes they are standing in the middle of a legal landmine. "This is highly irregular," she murmured. "I cannot override a primary block without consulting the legal compliance department." I stood perfectly still. "Then call them," I replied. "Tell your compliance officer that if they deny access to the legally designated proxy based on a fraudulent document submitted by a secondary party, they are exposing this clinic to a catastrophic liability lawsuit. I am not leaving this lobby without the emergency room discharge summary." She stared at me for 3 long seconds. She recognized the look in my eye. It is the look of someone who knows exactly how the machinery works and is fully prepared to dismantle it. "Please take a seat, Miss Mason," she whispered, picking up the phone receiver. "This will take a few minutes." I sat in a stiff vinyl chair near a rack of outdated magazines. I watched the second hand on the wall clock sweep through 20 agonizing rotations. My mind raced, analyzing Richard's phone call. Memory care transfer forms. Friday deadline. They were not just selling the house. They were physically evicting Beatrice by the end of the week to ensure the buyer took possession of an empty asset. A heavy wooden door behind the desk clicked open. A man wearing a sharp gray suit and carrying a manila folder stepped out. He whispered something to Brenda and slid the folder across the counter. Brenda nodded, her face pale. She gestured for me to approach. "The compliance director reviewed your documents," she said, her voice stripped of all emotion. "Your proxy designation has been verified as the primary active authority. The restriction placed by Richard Mason has been nullified." She pushed the manila folder toward me. "Here is the emergency room discharge summary you requested." I took the folder, walking straight out the sliding doors into the blinding Missouri heat. I did not wait to reach my car. I stood on the hot asphalt and flipped the cover open. The clinical notes were typed in dense medical shorthand, but the final assessment paragraph was highlighted in bold black ink. Patient admitted presenting with severe systemic infection resulting in profound acute delirium. Vitals unstable. Patient is experiencing vivid auditory hallucinations and lacks orientation to time, place, or person. Attending physician confirms patient currently lacks the cognitive capacity to sign medical consent forms or legal discharge paperwork. Recommend continuous observation. I checked the timestamp on the doctor's signature. It was logged at 9:15 on a Tuesday morning. I pulled the photocopied forgery from my binder. The notary stamp on Richard's fake power of attorney was dated the exact same Tuesday. The time of execution was recorded at 10:30. 75 minutes after a licensed emergency room physician declared Beatrice legally incompetent to sign a discharge form, my father stood over her hospital bed and forced her to sign away her life savings. I had the smoking gun. The medical fraud was absolute and undeniable. I closed the folder, sliding it safely into the binder. The trap they built was crumbling. My phone vibrated violently against my hip. The screen flashed with an incoming text message. It was not my mother. It was a number I rarely saw outside of obligatory holiday greetings. Julian. The message was brief and arrogant. We need to talk. Meet me at Grandma's house right now. I stared at the glowing screen. The golden child had entered the board. The silent theft was about to become very loud. The air conditioning in my sedan struggled against the midday Missouri heat as I navigated the winding roads back toward Chesterfield. My hands gripped the leather steering wheel. The black binder rested on the passenger seat, securing the emergency room medical chart that proved my father committed felony fraud. The pieces of their scheme were crystallizing in my mind, but a missing variable remained. I still needed to identify the phantom buyer orchestrating the shadow transaction. I turned onto Beatrice's quiet suburban street, and a glaring reflection of sunlight caught my eye. A heavy-duty pickup truck was parked on my grandmother's front lawn. It was not in the paved driveway. It rested directly on the grass. The pristine chrome wheels sank into the manicured turf, leaving deep, muddy trenches near the sprinkler heads. It was a $90,000 vehicle that had never hauled a single piece of lumber or towed a work trailer. It belonged to my older brother, Julian. Julian operates on a frequency of pure, unearned confidence. He is the golden child of our family. Over the past decade, he launched a string of bespoke startup companies, ranging from a craft brewery application to a boutique supply chain firm. Every single venture collapsed under the weight of his own financial mismanagement. Yet he never faced a single consequence for his reckless spending. Susan and Richard always rushed in to quietly settle his debts and preserve his social standing. They drained their own savings to ensure their son never had to learn the definition of failure. While I studied compliance law and paid my own tuition, Julian burned through seed capital and wore designer clothing. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the foyer. The heavy scent of bergamot and cedarwood cologne overpowered the faint smell of lemon polish. The house was unnervingly quiet. I walked toward the kitchen, listening to the sound of cupboard doors opening and closing. Julian stood in front of the open refrigerator drinking pulp-free orange juice, straight from the glass carton. He wore a fitted black shirt and premium denim. His hair was perfectly styled. He looked like a man who did not have a single care in the world. He lowered the carton when I walked into the room, but he did not offer a greeting. He bypassed standard sibling pleasantries and went straight to intimidation. "Mom called me," he said. His voice was smooth, pitched low to project authority. "She said you are asking a lot of unnecessary questions, Luna. She is crying in her hotel room because her daughter is trying to sabotage the family during a highly stressful transition." I set my keys on the granite island, keeping my breathing slow and measured. "Where is Beatrice?" I asked. Upstairs, taking a nap, he replied, waving his free hand dismissively. "Listen to me very closely. This situation is already handled. Dad is buckling under the stress of paying for her future residential care. The medical bills are piling up. We are drowning in expenses, and the only pragmatic solution is to liquidate this property before it drains everyone dry. I stepped in to facilitate the transaction because someone had to make the hard choices. I watched his facial muscles as he spoke. He was reciting a rehearsed script. The cadence was too rhythmic. He played the reluctant savior, burdened by the heavy responsibilities of leadership. It was a masterful performance designed to make me feel small and irrational. He shifted his weight from his left foot to his right, a classic physical tell indicating deception. "You are selling her home for $450,000, I said, keeping my tone strictly conversational. "That is a steep discount, Julian. Comparable properties on this street fetch well over $600,000. Why are you rushing a fire sale?" Julian wiped a drop of orange juice from his chin. A slow, condescending smirk spread across his face. "You audit hospital charts, Luna. You do not understand high-level real estate economics. A traditional listing takes months. You have to stage the rooms, host open houses, and negotiate repair credits. We found an anonymous corporate investment group willing to bypass all that friction. They are doing us a profound favor." He leaned against the granite counter, crossing his arms over his chest. "They are offering cold, hard cash. As is condition, the funds clear escrow in exactly 10 days. It is a clean exit. We take the money, we secure a bed for Grandma, and everyone moves forward." An anonymous corporate investment group, I repeated, letting the syllables hang in the quiet kitchen. "Yes," Julian snapped, his patience wearing thin. "A private equity firm. They buy undervalued assets and hold them in a portfolio. It is standard business practice, and it is none of your concern. Your only job right now is to step back. If you derail this contract, you will be the one responsible for ruining Mom and Dad. You will be the villain of this family." He took 2 steps forward, invading my personal space, trying to use his height to force a physical retreat. "Do not force me to cut you out of the loop permanently, Luna. I will change the locks on this house today if I have to. Let the men handle the heavy lifting." I did not move. I looked up into his eyes, and a warm, thrilling sensation blossomed in the center of my chest. It was the intoxicating power of dramatic irony. Julian stood there radiating arrogance, bragging about a financial windfall he believed was already secured in the bank. He thought I was just a naive younger sister armed with nothing but emotional objections. He had no idea I was the legal gatekeeper of the estate. He did not know Evelyn Cole had delivered a notarized trust naming me as the sole trustee. He did not know I held the medical chart proving his father forged a legal document. He was threatening to lock me out of a house he could never legally sell. We were playing a high-stakes game of chess, and he did not even realize the board belonged to me. The urge to smile was overwhelming, but I suppressed it. I maintained a perfectly blank expression, shielding my thoughts behind a wall of quiet compliance. "I understand, Julian," I said. My voice was eerily calm. "I hear exactly what you are saying." He exhaled a long breath of relief, mistaking my calm demeanor for submission. "Good," he said. He set the orange juice carton on the counter. "Stay out of the paperwork. Go back to your hospital spreadsheets." He turned on his heel and walked down the hallway. The front door clicked shut. A moment later, the heavy-duty truck roared to life. The tires spun recklessly, spinning wet dirt into the air as he backed off the ruined lawn and sped down the residential street. The moment the engine noise faded, I pulled my laptop from my work bag. I set the computer on the granite island and powered it on. Julian was an arrogant man, but he was not a sophisticated criminal. Arrogant men always leave a digital trail because they believe they are too smart to be caught. I connected to the wireless network and opened a secure browser. I navigated directly to the Missouri Secretary of State official website. I clicked on the Business Entity Search portal. The cursor blinked in the empty text field, waiting for a query. I typed the name printed on the hidden purchase agreement, Apex Horizon Holdings. I pressed the Enter key, and waited for the database to reveal the identity of the anonymous corporate buyer. The blue progress bar crawled across the top of my browser. My kitchen was eerily silent, except for the low, rhythmic hum of the refrigerator. The Missouri Secretary of State Business Registry is an antiquated system plagued by slow servers. It took 15 agonizing seconds for the query results to populate. A single row of text appeared on the sterile white background. Apex Horizon Holdings, LLC. Status: active. Date of formation: 72 days ago. 72 days. That specific timeline placed the creation of this corporate entity right around the same week Susan and Richard began boasting about their upcoming Aspen vacation. They were laying the quiet groundwork for this theft long before they ever booked their flight tickets. The lockbox, the fake medical papers, the whispered phone calls. It was all a premeditated operation. I clicked the hyperlink to download the original Articles of Organization. When the scanned PDF loaded on my screen, I began my standard forensic routine. People who set up shell companies always try to hide their fingerprints, but they rarely possess the discipline to cover every single track. The primary contact listed on the first page was a generic proxy service called Midwest Corporate Protections. This is a common evasion tactic. You pay a registered agent a nominal annual fee to put their address on public records instead of your own, keeping your identity shielded from casual observers. It works against curious neighbors. It does not work against a compliance auditor who hunts phantom billing codes for a living. I ignored the registered agent and scrolled down to the financial reporting section. Even ghost corporations must receive franchise tax notices from the State Revenue Department. A tax correspondence address cannot be hidden behind a proxy wall. I located the designated mailing field at the bottom of the second page. The address was not a residential home or a downtown high-rise. It was a commercial post office box located inside a dilapidated strip mall on Route 61 in St. Louis, Suite 400, Box 82. I stared at those digits. The numbers felt familiar. A faint memory tugged at the edge of my consciousness. I opened a new browser tab and logged into my personal email account. I clicked the search bar and typed my brother's name, followed by the word invoice. Julian is notorious for demanding financial rescues under the guise of urgent business investments. Last December, his boutique supply chain startup hit a severe cash flow crisis. He sent our parents a frantic request for a $20,000 bridge loan to cover his holiday payroll obligations. Susan had forwarded that email to me, asking if I could contribute a few $1,000s to help my brother through a temporary rough patch. I had declined her request, but I kept the email archived for my own records. The search algorithm yielded the message instantly. I opened the attached PDF invoice from his logistics company. The corporate letterhead featured a sleek, modern geometric logo. Underneath the graphic was his official billing address, Suite 400, Box 82, St. Louis, Missouri. The cold reality washed over my skin, chilling me to the bone. The anonymous corporate investor buying my grandmother's home was not a private equity firm from another state. The buyer was my own flesh and blood. Julian was Apex Horizon Holdings. I pushed my chair back from the granite island and stood up. The disjointed puzzle pieces snapped together, forming a grotesque and devastating picture. My parents were not selling the property to a stranger at a bad price because they were desperate or ignorant of the current housing market. They were orchestrating a deliberate, targeted transfer of generational wealth. I paced across the hardwood floor, mapping out the exact mechanics of their scheme. The property held a true market valuation of $600,000. By drafting a secret purchase contract for $450,000, they were handing Julian the deed at a steep, unearned discount. The moment escrow closed, Julian could list the pristine house on the open market at full price. He would quickly secure a legitimate buyer and pocket the $150,000 equity spread. That stolen equity was the exact amount he needed to bail out his sinking logistics business and maintain his facade of entrepreneurial success. But the betrayal ran deeper than a simple real estate flip. A shadow buyer requires shadow funding. Julian did not have $450,000 in liquid cash to purchase the home. That meant the funds had to come from an outside source. The home equity line of credit Susan complained about on the phone provided the missing variable. Susan and Richard had borrowed heavily against their own suburban residence to generate the cash for Julian's shell company. The final step of their operation was the most sinister element of all. When Julian purchased the home, the transaction funds would be deposited directly into Beatrice's personal bank account. This is where Richard's fraudulent power of attorney became the ultimate weapon. As the designated legal agent, Richard held unrestricted access to her finances. The second the money cleared the bank, he could wire the entire balance right back to himself to pay off the home equity loan. They had engineered a closed loop of theft. They were cannibalizing Beatrice to save the golden child. My grandmother would be left with zero financial assets, evicted from the only home she knew, and dumped into a substandard Medicaid ward, while her family profited from her ruin. The sheer calculation required to execute this plan made my stomach turn. They had plotted every detail with chilling precision. They truly believed they had insulated themselves against any legal blowback by keeping the transaction entirely within the family unit. I walked back to the laptop, preparing to close the state registry tabs. Before my cursor reached the exit button, my eyes drifted to the bottom margin of Julian's LLC formation document. Every official state filing requires a certified witness to verify the identities of the signing parties. A circular notary public seal rested in the lower right corner, stamped over a cursive signature. I zoomed in on the digital stamp, magnifying the text. The name encircling the Missouri state emblem read, Todd Miller. I knew that name. Todd Miller was Julian's high school friend. He was a nervous, quiet guy who currently managed a franchise shipping and printing center near the interstate highway. I reached for the black binder resting on the counter. I flipped the heavy plastic cover open and extracted the fake power of attorney my father had submitted to the hospital clinic. I bypassed the forged signature and looked straight at the bottom right corner of the page. The identical circular stamp stared back at me. Todd Miller. My brother used his childhood friend to certify a fraudulent shell company. My father used the exact same friend to validate a legal document while Beatrice was shivering in a hospital bed, drowning in a fever-induced delirium. They had relied on a weak link to bind their entire conspiracy together. Con artists always leave a trail because they assume everyone else operates with the same lack of integrity. They assumed Todd would keep his mouth shut out of blind loyalty to Julian. But Todd was a licensed state notary. He was bound by strict government regulations and faced severe legal penalties for perjury. He had sworn an oath to keep meticulous public records. Todd was the human loose end they forgot to trim. I closed the binder and reached for my car keys. I did not need to fight my parents or argue with my brother. I just needed to pay a visit to a strip mall shipping center and ask Todd Miller to show me his ledger. The drive down Route 61 took me past a sprawling landscape of decaying commercial infrastructure. Faded asphalt lots connected discount liquor markets to empty storefronts with lease signs taped in the windows. I pulled into a strip mall anchored by a dying pet supply shop and a neon yellow sign for a national shipping franchise. This was Todd Miller territory. I remembered Todd from long high school afternoons. He was a nervous kid who always hovered at the edge of my brother's social circle, hoping some of Julian's unearned confidence might rub off on him. A few years ago, Julian sat in my parents' kitchen, mocking Todd over a beer. Julian thought it was hilarious that his friend kept triplicate receipts for a modest side hustle. He laughed, saying Todd operated his life as if a federal tax auditor was tracking his every move via satellite. Todd lived in a perpetual state of bureaucratic terror. His obsessive paranoia regarding ledgers and audits was a running joke in my family. To me, that paranoia was a loaded weapon waiting to be fired. I pushed through the glass door of the shipping center. A small electronic bell chimed, announcing my arrival. The air conditioning unit hummed loudly, struggling to filter the distinct odors of hot printer toner, packing tape, and recycled cardboard. Todd stood behind the main counter wearing a navy blue polo shirt stitched with the corporate franchise logo. His hair was thinning at the crown, but he retained that same anxious energy from a decade ago. He was taping a cardboard box for a customer who had just exited. He looked up when the bell rang. Recognition flickered in his eyes, followed quickly by a strained customer service smile. "Luna," he said, wiping his hands on his denim slacks. "Wow, it has been a long time. Julian did not mention you were visiting town." I did not return the smile. I walked directly to the counter and placed my heavy black binder on the weighing scale. The thick plastic cover hit the metal plate with a dull, authoritative thud. I unzipped the side pocket and withdrew the photocopied power of attorney. I laid it flat on the laminate counter right in front of his keyboard. I tapped my index finger on the circular blue stamp in the bottom corner. "Is this your official state seal, Todd?" He leaned forward, adjusting his posture. The smile faltered. "Yeah," he replied, his voice dropping a fraction of an octave. "That is my commission number. Julian brought some estate paperwork by a few weeks ago. Standard stuff. Is there a problem with the formatting?" I reached back into the binder and extracted the hospital emergency room discharge summary. I placed it directly beside the legal document. "I want you to read the highlighted section of this clinical chart," I instructed, keeping my tone low and surgical. Todd blinked down at the paper. His eyes tracked across the dense medical shorthand, stopping at the bold paragraph detailing acute delirium and cognitive collapse. He swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed against the collar of his polo shirt. "Look at the timestamp on the physician's signature," I said. 9:15 in the morning. Now look at the timestamp you wrote next to your notary seal. 10:30 in the morning. Todd shifted his weight backward, bumping his hip against a tall stack of shipping envelopes. "I do not understand what you are showing me, Luna. I just stamp the forms people bring into the shop." "You are a commissioned notary public for the state of Missouri," I countered. "Your sole legal mandate is to verify the physical presence and the identity of the signatory. You are required to look the individual in the eye, check their government-issued identification, and watch them sign the paper." Beatrice Mason was lying in a hospital bed with an intravenous line in her arm, suffering from a severe neurological event, while you pressed that stamp onto this page. A fine sheen of sweat broke out across his upper lip. He looked toward the front door, hoping another customer would walk in and break the tension. The parking lot remained empty. "Julian told me she signed it at home," he stammered. His voice was beginning to tremble. "He said she was too frail to ride in the car, so he brought it here for me to execute. I have known your family for 20 years, Luna. I trusted him." "Trust does not hold up in a deposition, Todd. Participating in the fraudulent transfer of real estate equity constitutes a felony. My job involves hunting compliance violations. I know the exact sequence of events that follows a forged legal instrument. The state regulatory board strips your commission. The franchisor revokes your store lease. The district attorney files charges for elder financial exploitation." He gripped the edge of the laminate counter. His knuckles turned white. "Please," he whispered. "I run a small business. I cannot afford a legal defense. I did not know they were doing anything illegal. Julian gave me $500 for the inconvenience." I did not care about his excuses. I only cared about the paper trail. "Under the revised statutes of this state, every commissioned notary is mandated to maintain a chronological journal of official acts," I stated. "That journal is a matter of public record. It is not shielded by privacy laws. Produce your logbook." Todd did not argue. He turned around and unlocked a lower filing cabinet beneath the cash register. He pulled out a heavy bound ledger with a faux leather cover. He dropped it onto the counter. Dust motes danced in the fluorescent light as he flipped through the thick, numbered pages. His trembling finger stopped near the bottom of a page dated 3 weeks ago. He turned the book toward me. His paranoid, meticulous bookkeeping had captured the truth flawlessly. The ledger line detailed a durable power of attorney document. The fee collected was noted, but the column designated for the signatory signature did not contain my grandmother's name. The ink spelled out Julian Mason. Julian had signed the public ledger acknowledging he was the only person standing in the shipping center when the fake document was certified. The logbook proved Beatrice was a ghost during her own legal surrender. "Put this page on the glass," I commanded, pointing to the heavy commercial copy machine behind him. "Print a high-resolution duplicate. Sign and date the copy to verify it is an unaltered reproduction of your official state journal." Todd moved with frantic obedience, the machine whirred, flashing a bright green light across the glass pane. He handed me the warm sheet of paper, clicking his pen to sign his name across the bottom margin. I slid the copy into my binder, snapping the metal rings shut. "You do not need to call a lawyer, Todd," I said, securing the zipper. "As long as I possess this ledger page, you are just an administrative witness. Do not call my brother. Do not warn my parents. If you alert them, I will mail this journal page directly to the Attorney General before the sun sets. I will not say a word," he promised, stepping back from the counter. "I swear it." I walked out of the store, pushing the glass door open into the oppressive midday heat. The asphalt radiated warmth through the soles of my shoes. I had secured the final weapon. The trust protected the house. The medical records proved the forgery. The notary ledger identified the culprit. The financial trap was fully constructed and ready to snap shut. I reached the driver's side door of my sedan and pressed the unlock button on my key fob. Deep inside my purse, my cell phone began to vibrate. It was a long, continuous buzz, indicating a high-priority alert. I pulled the device from my bag. A text message from my Aunt Diane flashed across the locked screen. "How could you do this to your own mother, Luna? She is devastated." Before I could process the words, a second text arrived. This one was from my cousin Mark. "You need serious psychiatric help. Stay away from Grandma." The phone vibrated a third time, pushing a social media notification to the top of the queue. Susan had tagged 20 extended family members in a lengthy public post. The preview text read, "Please send prayers for our family during this dark chapter. My daughter is suffering a severe mental crisis and is actively trying to block critical medical care for my mother." My parents had realized someone was rattling the locks on their scheme. They did not know what evidence I held, but they knew I was circling the perimeter. Susan had initiated a preemptive strike. She was burning my reputation to the ground to ensure no one would believe a word I said when the truth finally surfaced. I stood in the sweltering parking lot, watching the notifications stack up on my screen. The social assassination had begun. The notifications kept stacking on my illuminated display. Each new alert was a digital stone cast by my own relatives. I unlocked the device and opened the primary family social group. Susan had crafted a masterpiece of social manipulation. Her post featured a photograph of herself and Beatrice from 3 Christmases ago. They were both smiling. The text below the image was a masterclass in weaponized victimhood. "It breaks my heart to share this," Susan wrote, "but our family is navigating a dark chapter. My mother is declining rapidly. As Richard and I work tirelessly to secure her future care, my daughter Luna has suffered a mental break. She is interfering with critical medical decisions and threatening our efforts to keep Beatrice safe. Please send prayers for Luna to find healing and for us to find peace." Beneath the paragraph sat dozens of sympathetic comments from country club associates, church members, and distant cousins. They praised Susan for her unwavering strength. They offered generic prayers for my fractured psyche. My thumb hovered over the reply button. The urge to type a response burned in my chest. I wanted to upload the emergency room discharge summary. I wanted to post the forged notary ledger. I wanted to burn her pristine suburban reputation to ash right there in the comments section. But I remembered the cardinal rule of auditing. You never debate the target in the court of public opinion. The guilty party always possesses more stamina for theater. They will drag you into a shouting match, twist your words, and use your righteous anger as proof of your instability. You do not argue with a PR campaign. You let the ink speak at the finish line. I swiped the application closed and engaged the silent profile on my phone. I tossed the device onto the passenger seat next to my black binder. The truth did not require a Facebook audience to be valid. I slid into the driver's seat and started the engine, turning the air conditioning to its maximum setting. The frigid air blasted my face, drying the sweat on my forehead. I needed to understand their precise timeline. Richard had been pacing the clinic lobby earlier, demanding expedited memory care transfer forms by Friday. He was in a rush to physically remove Beatrice from her home, ensuring the property was vacant for the new buyer. I reached over and unzipped the binder. I bypassed the legal deeds and went straight to the medical file I had extracted from the hospital compliance desk. The stack of clinical papers held more than just the emergency room notes. It contained the ongoing administrative requests submitted by my father under his fraudulent proxy. I flipped through the pages until I found a standard admission transfer packet. The header displayed the destination facility. It did not say Oakwood Luxury Assisted Living. The glossy brochure Susan had left on the kitchen counter was a calculated prop. It was a shiny object designed to pacify my suspicions while they coordinated the real eviction. I traced my finger across the destination field. The printed text read, Pine Creek Transitional Care. I tethered my laptop to my cellular hotspot, right there in the sweltering parking lot. I opened a search engine and typed the name of the facility. The search results did not yield resort-style photography or 5-star reviews. Pine Creek was a state-funded Medicaid ward located on the industrial outskirts of the city. The digital footprint was a horror story. I clicked on a public database managed by the Missouri Department of Health and Senior Services. Every licensed care home undergoes routine inspections, and those reports are available to anyone who knows where to look. The registry for Pine Creek was bathed in red warning flags. The facility had been cited for 14 severe health code violations in the past 12 months. The public records detailed chronic understaffing. Patients were left in soiled linens for consecutive shifts. The administration had failed to maintain operable heating and cooling systems during extreme weather fluctuations. There were documented investigations into unexplained bruising and improper administration of narcotic sedatives. It was a warehouse for the forgotten. It was a bleak, concrete structure where wards of the state were sent to fade away in silence. A wave of profound nausea hit my stomach. I leaned over the center console, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles ached. The scope of their depravity expanded far beyond simple financial theft. I had spent the last 48 hours treating this as a real estate crime. I thought they were stealing her $600,000 asset to enrich Julian, while allocating a portion of the stolen funds to house Beatrice in a respectable enclave. I was wrong. They were taking everything. To fund Julian's failing logistics company, they were seizing the entire equity of the house. Because they were draining her accounts dry, Beatrice would instantly qualify as indigent. That poverty status allowed them to dump her into a taxpayer-funded Medicaid nightmare. They were sentencing an 80-year-old woman to a squalid, abusive environment to ensure their golden child could continue leasing expensive trucks and drinking premium orange juice. My parents were not just thieves. They were architects of misery. They were willing to sacrifice my grandmother's health, dignity, and eventual survival just to avoid holding Julian accountable for his own failures. The stakes had shifted. I was no longer fighting to save a parcel of suburban real estate. I was fighting to save her life. I needed to get back to Chesterfield immediately. I threw the vehicle into drive, pulling out of the strip mall and accelerating toward the interstate on-ramp. The highway traffic was dense, but I wove through the lanes with singular focus. The black binder rested securely beside me. It was no longer just an audit file. It was a rescue operation. I was 10 miles away from her neighborhood when the digital dashboard display in my car flashed with an incoming call. The system overrode my silent setting because this specific contact was programmed into my emergency favorites list. The name Eleanor Gable illuminated the screen. Eleanor was Beatrice's next-door neighbor. She was a retired school teacher who spent her days tending a prize-winning rose garden and keeping a watchful eye on the street. We exchanged numbers 3 years ago, after Beatrice suffered a minor fall on the porch. Eleanor promised to alert me if anything ever seemed out of the ordinary next door. I tapped the steering wheel button to answer the call. The Bluetooth speaker crackled to life. "Eleanor," I said, keeping my voice steady, "is everything all right?" "Luna," her voice trembled, laced with genuine panic, "I am so sorry to bother you during work hours, but I did not know who else to contact. Your parents are not answering their phones. What is happening, Eleanor?" "There is a large commercial vehicle backing onto your grandmother's front lawn," she said, her breath hitching. "2 men in work uniforms just dropped the tailgate. Susan and Richard are standing on the porch holding flattened cardboard boxes. Luna, they are taking her furniture out the front door." My foot pressed harder against the accelerator pedal. The engine revved, pushing the sedan past the speed limit. "Is Beatrice inside?" I asked. "I can see her through the bay window," Eleanor replied. "She is sitting in her floral recliner. She looks terrified." Luna. "Susan is pulling pictures off the living room walls. I walked over to ask if they needed help, and your mother snapped at me to mind my own business. She said they were transitioning Beatrice to a memory unit today." They were accelerating the timeline. My visit to Todd's shipping center must have spooked Julian. He called his parents, and they decided to execute the eviction before I could mount a legal defense. They were trying to empty the property and finalize the shadow sale before the weekend arrived. "Stay in your house, Eleanor," I instructed. "Do not engage with them again. I am 10 minutes away." I ended the connection. The highway blurred past my windows. The quiet investigation was over. The collision was here. I had the documents. I had the truth. Now I had to stand in the doorway and stop them from packing my grandmother into a cardboard box. The tires of my sedan skidded against the hot pavement as I took the final turn onto Beatrice's quiet suburban street. I did not bother pulling into the driveway. I parked at a sharp angle blocking the curb. I left the engine running and grabbed the heavy black binder from the passenger seat. A massive white box truck was idling on the front lawn, its diesel exhaust polluting the humid afternoon air. The rear tailgate was lowered, revealing a cavernous, empty cargo hold. 2 men wearing gray work shirts were wrestling Beatrice's antique mahogany dining table out the front door. The heavy wooden legs scraped against the doorframe, gouging deep splinters into the white paint. I ignored the movers and marched straight up the porch stairs. The screen door was propped open with a heavy brass bookend. I stepped into the foyer, and the chaotic noise of the ambush hit me instantly. Ripping packing tape, the clatter of stacked dishware, the frantic rustling of newspaper. The living room was a disaster zone. Susan stood near the fireplace wearing expensive athletic leisure wear, violently ripping framed family photographs off the floral wallpaper. She tossed them haphazardly into a large cardboard crate. Richard was in the adjacent kitchen shoving Beatrice's fine bone china into a separate box without bothering to wrap the delicate ceramic plates. In the center of the destruction sat my grandmother. Beatrice was anchored to her floral recliner, clutching a crocheted throw pillow tight against her chest. Her silver hair was disheveled. Her eyes were wide and frantic, darting from the empty walls to the unfamiliar men carrying away her dining table. She looked like a hostage in her own sanctuary. I stopped in the center of the archway. "Stop touching her things," I commanded. My voice was not a shout. It was a flat, heavy directive that cut through the noise of the packing tape. Richard froze in the kitchen, a ceramic saucer dangling from his hand. He refused to turn around. He kept his gaze fixed firmly on the granite countertop, playing the coward to the bitter end. Susan spun around. She did not display a single ounce of guilt or surprise. Her face immediately tightened into a mask of righteous indignation. The performative maternal victimhood she wielded online evaporated instantly in person. "You have no right to be here, Luna," she hissed, marching toward the archway. "We are decluttering the property. The residential facility will only allow a few personal items in her new room. We are handling this transition efficiently, and your hysterical interference is actively harming your grandmother." She pointed a manicured finger toward the open front door. I want you to leave this house right now. You are trespassing on a private estate process. Your father is the sole legal agent for this property, and he has full authority to liquidate these assets." I looked past her manicured finger and met Beatrice's terrified gaze. I offered her a single, slow nod to let her know the cavalry had arrived. Then I looked back at the woman who had spent my entire childhood demanding gratitude for every basic necessity she ever provided. I did not raise my voice. I did not engage in a screaming match. I unzipped the black binder and extracted the certified copy of the Revocable Living Trust. The heavy legal paper felt cool against my fingers. I held it up, ensuring the state recording stamp was visible in the top margin. "Richard is not the legal agent," I stated cleanly. "His authority does not exist." Susan crossed her arms over her chest, scoffing loudly. "We have a signed, durable power of attorney, sweetheart. It is notarized. It gives your father complete control over her financial estate. You are a hospital clerk playing lawyer, and it is embarrassing." I stepped fully into the living room. My posture remained rigid, my tone utterly devoid of emotion. "A power of attorney grants an agent control over assets held in a personal name," I explained, delivering the facts like a lecture to a failing student. "But Beatrice does not own this real estate." Susan blinked. Her confident smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. "What are you talking about?" she snapped. "Of course she owns it. The deed is in her name." "The deed was transferred 14 months ago," I continued, tapping the crisp document in my hand. "Beatrice executed a revocable living trust. She legally conveyed ownership of this house, the surrounding land, and every physical asset inside these walls into the protection of that entity. The trust owns this property." I took another step forward, closing the distance between us. "The successor clause in this document dictates that upon Beatrice's cognitive decline, full administrative control transfers directly to the designated successor trustee." I looked toward the kitchen where Richard was still standing frozen. "That trustee is not Richard," I said loudly, ensuring my voice carried across the room. "The trustee is me. I am the sole legal administrator of this estate. Your forged document cannot touch an asset sheltered inside a trust. You cannot sell a house you do not legally own." The room plunged into a suffocating silence. The diesel engine of the moving truck rumbled outside, but inside the house, time seemed to halt. Richard finally turned around. His face was the color of wet ash. He looked at the legal paper in my hand, and then looked at his wife, realizing the entire foundation of their theft had just been vaporized. Susan's eyes darted frantically as her brain tried to process the logistical barrier I had just erected. She was a woman accustomed to bulldozing her way through conflict, using emotional manipulation. But you cannot gaslight a recorded deed. You cannot guilt-trip a legal trust. Then she did something that genuinely surprised me. She threw her head back and laughed. It was a harsh, brittle sound, devoid of any real humor. It was the desperate bravado of a narcissist who refuses to concede defeat. She waved her hand at the trust document as if swatting away a minor insect. "You think a piece of paper stops this family?" she mocked, her voice climbing an octave. "Trusts are dissolved every single day in probate court, Luna. We have medical documentation proving she is incompetent. We will file a motion to contest your authority tomorrow morning. A judge will look at a successful businessman like Julian, a devoted father like Richard, and a hysterical, ungrateful daughter like you, and they will rip that trust to shreds." She turned back to the cardboard crate and aggressively ripped another strip of packing tape from the plastic dispenser. The harsh ripping sound echoed against the bare walls. "We are not stopping this move," she declared. "The buyer is eager to take possession. We are contacting the title company to expedite the closing to tomorrow afternoon." I stood in the center of the ruined living room, watching her tape the box shut. A profound realization washed over me. She was too arrogant to verify my claims. She truly believed her social status and her sheer force of will could overwrite state property laws. She thought she could march into a commercial title office, present a fraudulent document, and force a transaction through sheer intimidation. If I stood in the doorway and physically fought the movers, I would just create a messy domestic dispute. The police might arrive. Susan would spin a masterful lie about her deranged daughter interfering with a medical transition. They would drag the battle into the chaotic realm of public opinion where she excelled. I could not win a shouting match on the front lawn. I had to defeat them in an arena where their lies held absolutely no currency. I had to let them walk into a room where neutral professionals enforced the rigid boundaries of the law. I lowered the trust document and slid it back into my binder. "You are right, Susan," I said, my voice dropping to a quiet, steady whisper. "We should not argue about this here. We should let the professionals handle it." She paused, the roll of packing tape hovering over the cardboard. She looked at me suspiciously, trying to gauge my sudden retreat. I turned away from her and walked over to Beatrice. I knelt beside the floral recliner, resting my hand gently over her frail, trembling fingers. "Do not worry, Grandma," I whispered softly, so only she could hear. "They are not taking you to Pine Creek. I promise you will sleep in this house tonight." Beatrice squeezed my hand, her sharp eyes searching my face for reassurance. She found it. I stood up, turned my back on my parents, and walked out the front door. The movers were securing the dining table in the back of the truck. I did not ask them to stop. I marched down the driveway, climbed into my idling sedan, and drove away, leaving them to pack the house for a buyer who would never hold the keys. I did not retreat out of surrender. I retreated because I realized the most devastating weapon you can use against an arrogant enemy is to step aside and let them walk blindly into their own execution. I pulled my car into a vacant parking lot a mile down the road. I shifted the transmission into park and grabbed my phone. I had less than 24 hours to prime the trap at the title company. The closing table was the final battlefield. I sat in the idling sedan with the air conditioning running on high, trying to regulate the frantic rhythm of my own pulse. The digital clock on my dashboard read 3 in the afternoon. The closing for the house had been accelerated. Susan and Richard were planning to finalize their shadow transaction by tomorrow. I had less than 24 hours to dismantle a conspiracy they had spent months building. I picked up my cell phone and navigated to the state government directory. I bypassed the local authorities and dialed the direct hotline for Adult Protective Services. The call connected to an automated routing system. I navigated the menus, pressing numbers to bypass the general inquiry lines, until a human operator finally answered. The intake worker introduced herself as Sarah. Her tone was measured and fatigued, the sound of a woman who spends her days listening to the darkest corners of family dynamics. I did not waste time with emotional appeals. I gave her the precise arithmetic of the crime. I detailed the forged, durable power of attorney. I provided the medical chart proving acute delirium. I exposed the phantom LLC created by my brother, and I outlined the immediate threat of a forced eviction into a substandard Medicaid facility. Sarah typed rapidly on her keyboard. The clicking echoed through the receiver. "You have compiled an extensive file, Miss Mason," she noted. "I am assigning this a high-priority tracking number based on the clinical documentation of cognitive impairment." I exhaled a sharp breath of relief. "Thank you, Sarah. The fraudulent real estate closing is scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. We need an investigator to intercept the transaction and secure my grandmother." The typing abruptly stopped. A heavy sigh crackled over the speaker. "Luna, I need you to understand our procedural limitations. We operate under strict state mandates. A high-priority flag means a field caseworker will initiate contact within 30 days. 30 days. The words hung in the sterile air of my car. I leaned forward, resting my forehead against the leather curve of the steering wheel. "I do not have 30 hours, Sarah." They are packing her belongings into a truck right now. By tomorrow night, she will be locked inside an abusive ward, and the equity in her home will be wired to a shell company. I understand your frustration, Miss Mason, but the state bureaucracy is a slow mechanism. We cannot dispatch law enforcement without a preliminary field assessment, and we cannot freeze a pending real estate transfer over the phone. You need to consult a private attorney to file an emergency halt." I thanked her and disconnected the call. The state welfare system was a glacier. It was designed to slowly grind through post-incident investigations, not pivot swiftly to prevent an ongoing disaster. The government would not save Beatrice today. I had to rely on the private sector. I opened my contact list and dialed Evelyn Cole. The estate attorney answered on the second ring. I relayed the events of the past few hours with rapid precision. I told her about Todd the notary. I explained the Medicaid ward discovery. I described the chaotic packing scene unfolding inside the house and the accelerated deadline for the closing table. "We need to file an emergency injunction," I urged, gripping the phone tight. "We need a judge to freeze the deed before the escrow officer can process the transfer." Evelyn remained silent for a long moment, processing the tactical landscape. When she spoke, her voice was razor sharp. "No," she advised. "We take the quiet path, Luna." "An injunction is a public declaration of war," she explained. "The moment we file a restraining order, the court requires us to serve notice to your parents. It tips our hand. If Susan and Richard realize we have the legal high ground, they will panic. They will freeze the remaining bank accounts to hire defense counsel. Worse, they might pull Beatrice out of the house tonight and hide her in an undisclosed medical facility outside our immediate jurisdiction, just to maintain leverage." I watched a stray leaf blow across my windshield. "What is the alternative?" I asked. "We let them sprint toward the finish line," Evelyn stated. "Let them walk into a controlled environment where their lies become a matter of official record. A commercial title office is a fortified bunker of liability. Escrow officers are personally responsible for the validity of the deeds they insure. They will not facilitate a fraudulent transfer if they possess contradictory evidence." Evelyn outlined her maneuver. She would contact the specific title company handling the Apex Horizon Holdings transaction. She had already pulled the broker data and identified the primary escrow officer, a veteran agent named Brenda. Evelyn would not call Brenda to make wild accusations of elder abuse. She would simply transmit the 14-month-old revocable living trust under the guise of routine supplemental compliance documentation. Brenda will review the file, Evelyn said. She will cross-reference the property parcel and flag the glaring discrepancy. The deed is sheltered in a trust. When your parents arrive tomorrow demanding a lucrative payout, they will face a brick wall built by their own hubris. I will meet you at the title office at 1:45. Bring the black binder. I ended the call feeling a profound sense of tactical clarity. The trap was primed. I just needed to survive the night. I drove back to the Chesterfield property under the cover of early evening darkness. The massive moving truck was gone. The front lawn bore the deep, muddy scars of heavy tires. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the foyer. The silence was suffocating. The house had been stripped of its soul. The walls were bare, exposing pale rectangular outlines where family portraits used to hang. The antique mahogany dining table was missing, leaving a vast, empty expanse on the hardwood floor. Cardboard crates were stacked haphazardly against the baseboards, holding decades of memories sealed behind cheap packing tape. I found Beatrice in the living room. She was sitting in her floral recliner, bathed in the soft amber glow of a single reading lamp. The surrounding furniture had been hauled away, leaving her isolated in the center of the room. She was staring at a blank patch of wallpaper. I walked into the kitchen and turned on the stove. The blue gas flame hissed to life. I filled a kettle and waited for the shrill whistle. I found a stray porcelain mug in a high cabinet they had forgotten to pack. I steeped dried chamomile flowers in the boiling water, carrying the warm cup back into the living room. I knelt on the floor beside her chair and offered the mug. The ceramic radiated heat against my palms. Beatrice took the cup. Her hands shook, sending tiny ripples across the surface of the pale yellow tea. She took a slow sip. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken grief. She had spent a lifetime building this sanctuary, only to watch her own children dismantle it for spare parts. I reached out and rested my hand over her knee. "We are going to fix this," I whispered. "You are safe." She lowered the mug, resting it on her lap. She turned her head and looked directly into my eyes. The cloudy confusion that often clouded her vision was gone. The heavy fog of age and exhaustion dissipated. Her spine straightened. The sharp, calculating intellect of the woman who used to run complex ledgers at the dining room table returned in full force. "Did you let them dig their hole?" she asked. Her voice was crisp and devoid of any frail hesitation. She knew exactly what was happening. She understood the mechanics of the ambush we were preparing. She had planted the legal seeds 14 months ago, and now she was asking for the harvest report. A fierce, proud smile broke across my face. I squeezed her hand, feeling the strength in her grip. "It is deep enough, Grandma," I replied. "They are never climbing out." She offered a single, definitive nod. She lifted the mug and took another sip of tea, projecting the calm certainty of a sovereign who knows the siege is already broken. I spent the night sleeping on the floral sofa guarding the front door. I woke up as the early morning sun filtered through the bare window panes. The house was still standing. The asset remained secure. I walked into the kitchen and prepared for the final battle. I opened the black binder and reviewed the ammunition one last time. I smoothed the plastic sleeves containing the recorded trust deed. I checked the neurologist capacity letter. I verified the clarity of the copied notary logbook. I traced the highlighted text on the hospital emergency room discharge summary. Every document was a lethal strike waiting to be deployed. I zipped the binder shut. The metallic teeth of the zipper locked the evidence in place. I dressed in a tailored navy blazer and dark slacks. It was the armor I wore when auditing hostile hospital boards. The stage was set. The audience was blind to the impending finale. It was time to drive to downtown St. Louis and close the deal. Downtown St. Louis is a sprawling canyon of mirrored glass and poured concrete. The midday sun beat down against the pavement, radiating heat through the soles of my shoes as I walked from the parking garage to the commercial high-rise. Evelyn Cole walked beside me. The estate attorney moved with the brisk, rhythmic pace of a woman who dictated terms for a living. She carried her structured leather briefcase. I carried the heavy black binder. We entered the ground floor lobby of the building and rode the silent elevator to the 14th floor. The polished brass doors slid open to reveal the reception area for Apex Title Services. The atmosphere inside a commercial title agency is entirely distinct from a standard corporate office. It is a fortified vault of liability. These firms serve as the ultimate gatekeepers of American real estate. They issue insurance policies guaranteeing a property deed is free of defects, liens, or competing claims. If an escrow officer facilitates a fraudulent transfer, the financial burden falls directly on their own corporate shoulders. They are meticulous paranoid and legally bound to verify every single signature that crosses their desk. That strict adherence to protocol made this office the perfect arena for my ambush. A receptionist guided us down a hushed hallway lined with frosted glass partitions. She ushered us into Conference Room B. The space was a sterile theater designed for high-stakes financial transactions. A long mahogany table dominated the center of the room, surrounded by 12 ergonomic leather chairs. A digital clock on the wall blinked the time in bright red numerals, 1:45 in the afternoon. A pitcher of ice water and a stack of crisp paper cups rested near a speakerphone. Sitting at the head of the long table was Brenda. She was a veteran escrow officer with silver hair cut into a sharp bob. Her reading glasses were perched near the tip of her nose. She was surrounded by neat geometric stacks of closing documents. Evelyn had transmitted the 14-month-old revocable living trust to her secure inbox earlier that morning under the guise of routine supplemental compliance. Brenda had spent the last 3 hours reviewing the files. She knew exactly why we were sitting in her conference room. Evelyn offered Brenda a curt professional nod. Brenda returned the gesture, maintaining a stoic, neutral expression. She did not ask questions. She simply arranged her pens and waited for the remaining parties to arrive. I took a seat near the center of the table. I placed the black binder flat against the polished wood. My hands were remarkably steady. The adrenaline that had fueled my frantic drive across the highway yesterday had burned away, leaving behind a cold, surgical focus. I watched the red digits on the wall clock flip forward. 2 o'clock arrived. The scheduled start time for the closing came and went. The hallway outside remained quiet. 2:10. 2:15. The tardiness was a signature trait of my family. Julian always operated on the assumption that the world would patiently wait for his arrival. He treated schedules as mere suggestions for subordinate people. Susan and Richard indulged his chronic lateness because confronting him required effort they preferred to avoid. They were 15 minutes late to steal a $600,000 asset. At 2:17, the heavy frosted glass door swung open. Julian marched into the conference room first. He practically glowed with unearned arrogance. He wore a tailored charcoal suit unbuttoned at the collar, projecting the aesthetic of a disruptive tech founder. A heavy gold watch peeked out from beneath his tailored cuff. Tucked under his left arm was a slim leather portfolio containing the corporate paperwork for his phantom shell company. Apex Horizon Holdings was about to become his financial salvation. Susan stepped through the doorway right behind him. She had curated her wardrobe specifically for this performance. She wore a crisp, conservative beige blazer over a modest black blouse. Her hair was pulled back into a severe, practical knot. She was dressed to play the role of the exhausted, devoted daughter who had made the agonizing decision to liquidate her mother's estate for the greater good of the family. Richard trailed them both, keeping his gaze fixed firmly on the carpet. He carried a brown accordion folder tucked against his ribs. He looked pale and rigid, the physical manifestation of a man buckling under the weight of his own forgery. Julian strutted toward the mahogany table, pulling out a leather chair with a loud scrape against the carpet. He tossed his portfolio onto the wood and looked up, ready to flash a winning smile at the escrow officer. His eyes swept past Brenda and locked onto my face. The smug confidence shattered instantly. He froze mid-stride, his hand still gripping the back of the leather chair. The color drained from his cheeks. Susan noticed his sudden paralysis. She followed his line of sight and spotted me sitting quietly in the center of the room with my hands folded over the black binder. The transformation in her demeanor was instantaneous. The exhausted martyr routine evaporated. Her jaw clenched tight, her eyes narrowed into furious slits. The veins in her neck protruded against the collar of her modest blouse. She did not bother offering a greeting. She turned her hostile glare directly toward the head of the table. "Excuse me," Susan demanded, her voice sharp and echoing off the glass walls. "Who let her in here?" Brenda looked up over the rim of her reading glasses. Her expression remained entirely impassive. She is an interested party to this transaction. "This is a private real estate closing," Susan countered, stepping forward and pointing a trembling finger in my direction. "This girl is currently experiencing a severe psychological episode. She has been harassing my family all week. She has no financial stake in this property, and she possesses zero legal authority to sit at this table. I want her removed from the premises before we sign a single piece of paper." Julian recovered his footing. He puffed out his chest, attempting to project masculine authority. "My mother is right," he declared, leaning his knuckles against the mahogany. "We are conducting a corporate cash acquisition today. We do not have time to entertain domestic disputes. Please ask security to escort my sister to the lobby so we can finalize the escrow transfer." I did not speak. I did not need to defend my presence. I simply looked at Evelyn. Evelyn Cole leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs, with the relaxed posture of a predator watching prey walk into a snare. The attorney steepled her fingers and stared at my mother. "We are not leaving Susan," she stated calmly. Susan scoffed, turning her attention back to the escrow officer. "You run a professional agency, Brenda. Are you going to allow unauthorized individuals to hijack a confidential legal procedure?" Brenda folded her hands over a stack of pristine closing documents. She did not raise her voice. She delivered the facts with the chilling precision of a judge issuing a final verdict. "Nobody is hijacking this procedure, ma'am," Brenda replied. "The property located in Chesterfield is not deeded to Beatrice Mason. The parcel was transferred into a revocable living trust over a year ago. Under state real estate law, a title company cannot clear escrow or transfer ownership of a sheltered asset without the explicit, authorized signature of the designated trustee. Brenda shifted her gaze from Susan to me. Luna Mason is the sole verified successor trustee on record. Her physical presence is required to clear the title. The words hit the room like a physical shockwave. Julian blinked, his mouth falling slightly open as his brain struggled to process the legal barrier. He looked at his mother, his eyes wide with sudden panic. Susan's posture stiffened, her crisp beige blazer suddenly looking like a straitjacket. She had bragged on the front lawn that a trust could be easily defeated in court, but standing inside a fortified commercial title office, the reality of the law was immovable. Richard stepped out from the shadows near the doorway. The silent enforcer of the fraud realized his wife and son were losing the battle. He walked up to the edge of the table, unfastening the elastic string on his brown accordion folder. He pulled out the photocopied power of attorney. "This is absurd," Richard declared, his voice vibrating with forced bravado. "My mother suffers from acute dementia. Any trust she signed is subject to medical review. I hold a durable power of attorney executed 3 weeks ago. This instrument grants me unrestricted administrative control over her entire financial portfolio." He slid the fraudulent document across the polished wood. The paper glided smoothly, coming to a halt directly in front of the escrow officer. "This document supersedes any previous arrangements," Richard insisted, tapping the mahogany table for emphasis. "I am the designated agent. I am authorizing the sale to Apex Horizon Holdings today. Proceed with the transaction." The conference room went dead silent. The only sound was the rhythmic ticking of the red digital clock on the wall. Julian wiped a bead of sweat from his temple. Susan held her breath, her eyes locked on the piece of paper sitting in front of the escrow officer. Brenda reached out and picked up the document. She did not flinch. She did not display a single ounce of intimidation. She held the photocopy up to the fluorescent ceiling light, examining the erratic, broken signature and the circular blue notary seal stamped in the bottom corner. She adjusted her reading glasses, pushing them higher up the bridge of her nose. She set the document face down on the table, aligning its edges perfectly with her stack of closing files. Then Brenda slowly shifted her gaze away from my father. She looked across the long expanse of the mahogany table and made direct eye contact with me. This was the moment. The trap was fully primed. The escrow officer held my gaze across the polished mahogany. Brenda did not offer a comforting smile or a sympathetic nod. She was an impartial referee, waiting for the final pieces of evidence to be submitted into the official record. The silence in the room stretched, pulling the tension tight across the sterile corporate air. I rested my palms against the cool leather cover of my black binder. The metallic rasp of the zipper echoed through the conference room as I opened it. I did not rush. The frantic energy of the previous days had crystallized into a cold, methodical precision. I extracted the first 3 plastic sleeves from the metal rings. My execution was surgical. I slid the documents across the smooth wood one by one, aligning them in a neat row directly in front of my father. I began my audit report. The first page is the recorded trust deed I stated, my voice carrying the steady, measured cadence of a prosecutor. It proves Beatrice transferred ownership of the Chesterfield property 14 months ago. The second page is a clinical evaluation drafted by the Chief of Neurology at St. Luke's Senior Health. Dr. Linwood confirmed she possessed pristine cognitive capacity on the day she signed that deed. Richard stared down at the papers. His jaw muscles tightened, forming hard ridges beneath his skin. The third page, I continued. Tapping the edge of the final document is a high-resolution copy of a public notary journal belonging to Todd Miller. It chronicles every official act performed in his shipping center 3 weeks ago. I turned my attention to the golden child sitting to my left. Julian had stopped breathing. His fingers were locked in a death grip around the edges of his leather portfolio. "You formed a phantom shell company called Apex Horizon Holdings," I said, addressing my brother directly. You registered the entity to the exact same commercial post office box you use for your failing logistics firm. Your plan was brilliant in its cruelty. You orchestrated a shadow transaction to purchase our grandmother's home for $450,000. The moment escrow cleared, you intended to flip the pristine asset on the open market, pocketing a six-figure equity spread to bail out your sinking business debts. Julian opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. His chest rose and fell in rapid, shallow jerks. I shifted my focus back to my father. But a shadow buyer requires a shadow seller, I explained. Beatrice would never agree to sell her sanctuary at a catastrophic discount. So you waited for a medical crisis. I pulled the final piece of ammunition from the binder. It was the hospital discharge summary. I laid it on top of his forged legal instrument covering his fake authority with undeniable medical truth. 3 weeks ago, Beatrice was admitted to the emergency ward suffering from a severe systemic infection. I declared the words hanging heavy in the chilled air. The attending physician documented profound acute delirium. She was experiencing terrifying hallucinations. The clinical notes explicitly state she lacked the baseline orientation required to sign consent forms or legal waivers. I pointed to the timestamp on the doctor's signature. Then I pointed to the timestamp printed on the fake power of attorney. 75 minutes after a licensed doctor declared her legally incompetent, you forced a pen into her trembling hand. Then Julian drove that forged paper to a strip mall, where his high school friend applied a state seal without the signatory present. That is not a misunderstanding. That is felony elder exploitation. The conference room suffocated in silence. The ambient hum of the ventilation system felt deafening. The invisible architecture of their conspiracy collapsed, leaving them exposed in the harsh fluorescent light. Richard turned the color of wet chalk. The blood drained from his face, leaving his skin pale and slick with a sudden sheen of nervous sweat. He looked down at the medical chart, confronting the undeniable physical proof of his crime. The patriarch who spent his life avoiding conflict had finally engineered a disaster he could not escape. Julian scrambled backward. His chair scraped harshly against the industrial carpet. He grabbed his leather portfolio, clutching it to his chest like a fragile shield. "This is a mistake," he stammered, his smooth, authoritative pitch fracturing into a panicked whine. "There are clerical errors here. Todd must have logged the wrong times. I was just trying to facilitate a transition. We are facing a cash flow issue." Susan did not try to deny the evidence. She recognized the battle of facts was lost, so she pivoted to her native language, emotional manipulation. Her rigid defensive posture crumbled. Her shoulders slumped forward. She covered her mouth with her hands, drawing in a ragged, theatrical gasp. The performative tears arrived, instantly pooling in her eyes and spilling over her cheeks. "How can you do this to us, Luna?" she sobbed, her voice trembling with manufactured grief. "We were drowning in medical bills. We were terrified about the future. I only did this for the family. I was trying to save us from ruin. You do not know the pressure your father is under." Her weeping echoed off the frosted glass walls, but it held zero currency in this room. Tears do not erase a forged signature. Sobbing does not rewrite a recorded deed. Richard realized his wife was failing to sway the escrow officer. Desperation seized him. He slammed his palm against the mahogany table, rattling the pitcher of ice water. "This is irrelevant," he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Medical charts can be disputed. We will hire our own physicians. We will drag this trust into probate court and tie it up in litigation for years. You cannot stop this transaction today because we are formally contesting your legal standing." He looked toward the head of the table, trying to project a commanding presence. "Process the closing, Brenda. The title is officially under dispute." That is when the final trap snapped shut. Evelyn Cole had been sitting quietly, observing the carnage with the detached interest of an apex predator. She uncrossed her legs and offered my father a cold, terrifying smile. "I did not just bring documents today, Richard," the estate attorney said. Her voice was smooth, slicing through the chaotic noise of the room. "I anticipated your attempt to force the escrow. While you were driving downtown celebrating your imaginary windfall, I was standing in a county courthouse. Evelyn checked the slim silver watch on her wrist. Exactly 1 hour ago, I stood before a probate judge in an ex parte emergency hearing. I presented the medical fraud evidence and filed a formal lis pendens against the Chesterfield property. The attorney leaned forward, resting her forearms on the table. The judge granted the temporary restraining order. The state electronic registry is officially locked. Brenda turned her attention to her dual computer monitors. She typed a rapid sequence of commands into her title insurance software. A sharp warning chime emanated from the computer speakers. A bright crimson banner illuminated her screen, casting a faint red glow across her silver hair. The escrow officer removed her reading glasses and folded them neatly on top of the ruined power of attorney. Counsel is correct, Brenda stated, projecting the unyielding authority of her profession. The parcel identification number carries an active judicial freeze. The title is locked. Brenda stood up, gathering the stack of pristine closing documents she had prepared for the shadow sale. This transaction is void. Furthermore, as a licensed agent of this state, I am bound by strict regulatory statutes. You have presented a falsified legal instrument in an attempt to execute a real estate transfer. I am legally obligated to flag this file for suspected mortgage fraud. She picked up the photocopies I had provided, tapping the edges against the wood to align the pages. I will be forwarding this entire dossier to the State Attorney General and the Regional Financial Crimes Division before the end of business today. I suggest you retain defense counsel. Please vacate my conference room. The verdict was absolute. There was no negotiation. There were no emotional appeals left to leverage. The escrow officer had just signed their bureaucratic death warrant. Richard collapsed into his leather chair, burying his face in his trembling hands. Julian stood frozen near the door, staring at the floor as his entrepreneurial delusions burned to ash. Susan ceased her weeping, realizing the tears had failed to save her. She stared at me with an expression of hollow, suffocating terror. They were shattered. Their theft was thwarted, and their reputations were destined for the criminal docket. But I was not finished. The real estate was secure, but the arithmetic remained unbalanced. They had committed a profound betrayal, and the ledger required a final entry. I reached into my binder, preparing to unleash the financial trapdoor. Julian paced the narrow perimeter of the conference room. He kicked the heavy brass base of a trash receptacle, sending it skittering across the carpet. A string of vicious curses spilled from his mouth, directed at the escrow officer, the attorney, and the universe that had finally stopped accommodating his failures. His designer facade had completely unraveled, revealing the desperate, panicked man hiding beneath the expensive suit. Richard remained slumped in his chair. He did not look up. He stared blankly at the swirling pattern of the industrial carpet. A patriarch who had allowed his weakness to metastasize into criminal fraud. He was watching the walls of his comfortable life collapse in real time. Susan pushed herself away from the mahogany table. Her hands gripped the back of her leather chair so tightly, her knuckles turned white. The realization that Brenda was actually forwarding the file to the state authorities struck her like a physical blow. The social standing she guarded with religious fervor was about to be dragged through a public criminal investigation. She turned her venom toward me. The performative weeping vanished, replaced by an unhinged primal fury. "You vindictive little sociopath," she shrieked, her voice cracking under the strain. "You are destroying this family. You walked in here today just to humiliate us. You do not care about Beatrice. You are just jealous of your brother. You are punishing us because we made the hard choices you were too weak to make." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice to match her hysteria. When you argue with a narcissist, they feed off your emotional escalation. It validates their narrative that you are the aggressor. The most devastating response is absolute freezing calm. I reached into the front pocket of the black binder and extracted the final document. "I am not destroying the family, Mom," I replied, ensuring my words carried clearly across the quiet room. The family is already destroyed. I am just balancing the ledger. I know exactly how you funded Julian's Phantom LLC. Julian stopped pacing. He stood frozen near the frosted glass door, his breathing shallow and rapid. Susan blinked, the fury in her eyes momentarily eclipsed by genuine confusion. I turned my gaze to my brother. You launched Apex Horizon Holdings 72 days ago, I stated, laying out the timeline. But a shell company requires capital to function. You have spent the last 3 years bankrupting every venture you touch. Your personal credit profile is a disaster. No commercial bank in the country would underwrite a $500,000 mortgage for you. You did not have the cash to make an off-market offer. I shifted my focus back to my mother. That is where your Aspen phone call provided the missing variable I explained. You complained about the nightmare interest rates on a recent home equity line of credit. You claimed the debt was for kitchen renovations. I pulled the Pine Creek Transitional Care printout from the binder. I laid it on the polished wood, keeping my hand resting on the paper. Nobody borrows $450,000 for kitchen cabinets, I continued. You and Dad took out a massive HELOC against your own pristine suburban home. You leveraged the entire equity of your primary residence to generate the cash for Julian's shell company. Your plan relied on a closed-loop transaction. Julian buys the Chesterfield property. The cash deposits into Beatrice's bank account. Dad uses the forged power of attorney to immediately drain the account, wiring the money right back to pay off the HELOC before the first billing cycle hits. The arithmetic of their scheme was laid bare in the fluorescent light. They had orchestrated a flawless, synchronized transfer of wealth, relying on the assumption that no one would audit the timeline. Then I slid the paper across the mahogany table. It glided smoothly, stopping directly in front of Susan. It was not a glossy brochure for a luxury resort. It was the state inspection report for the squalid Medicaid ward. You were willing to throw an 80-year-old woman into a facility cited for chronic physical abuse and systemic neglect, I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. You were going to let her die in soiled linens just so Julian could flip her house and maintain his country club lifestyle. You sacrificed your own mother to save your golden child. Susan stared down at the state inspection report. The bold red text highlighting the health code violations stared back at her. The decoy she had used to pacify me was exposed. Her moral bankruptcy was documented on public paper. But the cruelty is not what is going to ruin you, I declared, delivering the final blow. The math is going to ruin you. I stood up, pushing my chair back from the table. I picked up my black binder and tucked it securely under my arm. Because I stopped this closing today, the transaction loop is permanently broken, I explained, mapping out their inevitable financial execution. The cash you gave Julian is trapped in escrow. Without the fraudulent transfer, Dad cannot access Beatrice's bank account to repay the debt. You are currently holding a $500,000 high-interest loan tied directly to the deed of your own home, and you have absolutely zero liquid capital to make the monthly payments. The room grew so quiet, I could hear the faint hum of the computer servers humming under the desk. The sheer magnitude of their error crashed down upon them. They had cross-collateralized their own lives. They had bet their entire financial foundation on a crime they were too arrogant to execute properly. The failure of this real estate closing did not just save my grandmother's home. It triggered an automatic default on their own mortgage. Susan stopped screaming. The belligerent fury drained from her posture, leaving behind a hollow, suffocating terror. Her mouth opened, but she could not form a single syllable. The socialite who viewed wealth as a divine right suddenly realized she was days away from catastrophic insolvency. Richard finally looked up from the carpet. His eyes met mine, and I saw the distinct reflection of a man who knew he was looking into an abyss. He was going to lose his house, his savings, and his freedom. He had sacrificed his integrity to protect his son, and he had lost everything in the process. I turned my back on them and walked toward the frosted glass door. Evelyn Cole followed right behind me, her leather briefcase snapping shut with a sharp, definitive click. I paused in the doorway and looked back at the ruins of my family. Susan was gripping the edge of the mahogany table, gasping for air as a panic attack set in. Julian was staring blindly at the wall, trapped in a nightmare he could not charm his way out of. "I did not destroy the family, Mom," I said, my voice steady and resolute. "I audited it." I pushed the glass door open and walked out of Conference Room B. The hallway was cool and quiet. The receptionist at the front desk continued typing on her keyboard, entirely unaware that the people inside the adjacent room had just lost their entire world. The elevator ride down to the lobby was silent. The descent felt smooth, a frictionless glide away from the toxicity that had defined my family for decades. The heavy brass doors parted, and we stepped out into the expansive marble atrium. Evelyn stopped near the security desk. She adjusted the strap on her briefcase, offering a rare, genuine smile. "You handle cross-examination better than most litigators I know," she noted. "I learned from a very competent teacher," I replied. Evelyn nodded, checking the time on her silver watch. "The probate judge will require a formal hearing in 2 weeks to permanently revoke the fraudulent proxy and certify your administrative control. I will handle the filings. The State Financial Crimes Unit will likely contact you for a deposition regarding the notary ledger. Provide them with everything in that binder. I will email the digital scans tonight, I promised." The attorney turned toward the revolving glass doors. "Protect the asset, Luna." She walked away, merging into the bustling pedestrian traffic of downtown St. Louis. I stood in the quiet marble lobby, letting the residual adrenaline dissipate from my muscles. The war was over. The battlefield was cleared. The primary objective was secured. I pushed through the heavy glass doors, stepping out into the blinding afternoon sunlight. The heat radiated from the pavement, but for the first time in 2 weeks, I did not feel the oppressive weight of the humidity. The air felt clean. I walked toward the parking garage, clutching the black binder against my ribs, ready to drive back to Chesterfield. I had a promise to keep. The arithmetic of their ruin unfolded with the cold precision of a metronome. Numbers hold no empathy. They do not care about country club memberships or curated vacation photographs. When a borrower fails to meet a debt obligation, the banking system engages an automated protocol. Without the stolen equity from my grandmother, the high-interest loan my parents secured became a fatal anchor. The first missed payment triggered a standard warning letter. The second missed deadline generated a notice of default. By the third month, the financial institution initiated formal foreclosure proceedings against their sprawling suburban residents. Susan and Richard had spent decades crafting an illusion of bulletproof prosperity. That illusion shattered under the gavel of a county auctioneer. I did not attend the public auction. I heard about the event through the quiet whispers of our relatives. My parents were given 30 days to vacate the premises. They had to pack their own belongings into cardboard crates. There were no hired movers to carry their heavy mahogany furniture. They loaded a rented van under the cover of darkness, hoping to avoid the judgmental stares of their wealthy neighbors. The universe possesses a remarkable sense of irony. Because their credit scores plummeted into the severe risk category, no reputable landlord in a decent school district would approve their rental application. They were forced to secure a cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the industrial outskirts of St. Louis. Their new balcony overlooked a cracked asphalt parking lot surrounded by a rusted chain-link fence. It was located in the exact same rundown neighborhood where they had plotted to abandon Beatrice. They now shared a zip code with the squalid, state-funded ward they had selected for her. Every time Susan drove to the discount grocery store, she had to pass the bleak, concrete facade of Pine Creek Transitional Care. She was forced to live inside the nightmare she had designed for her own mother. Julian met a similar fate. The golden boy finally collided with a wall he could not charm his way over. Apex Horizon Holdings dissolved into the ether. Deprived of the cash infusion his logistics firm filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, the creditors seized his inventory. The bank repossessed his pristine heavy-duty truck, leaving him to navigate the city using public transportation. But the financial collapse was only a fraction of his punishment. The state attorney general opened a formal inquiry into the forged real estate documents. Todd Miller chose self-preservation over childhood loyalty. The shipping center manager surrendered his official ledger and testified under oath, exchanging his cooperation for a reduced administrative penalty. Julian spent the next year dodging subpoenas and sitting in bleak waiting rooms, praying to avoid a felony indictment. The swaggering entrepreneur was reduced to a frightened suspect, waiting for the gavel to fall. The social reckoning was swift and ruthless. In small, affluent circles, reputation is the primary currency. Susan had initiated a preemptive smear campaign, attempting to brand me as an unstable villain. Her strategy backfired the moment the truth hit the public record. The Adult Protective Services investigation concluded with a substantiated finding of financial exploitation. The emergency probate injunction became accessible to anyone conducting a routine background check. Aunt Diane pulled the court filings. Cousin Mark read the state inspection report detailing the horrific conditions at the Medicaid facility. The extended relatives who had flooded my phone with angry accusations suddenly understood the depth of the betrayal. The private family social group went dormant. The supportive comments disappeared. The country club associates who had praised my mother for her strength quietly deleted her contact information. Susan was exiled from the only community she valued. My phone began to ring a few weeks after the eviction. Susan left frantic voicemails pleading for a reconciliation. Richard sent lengthy text messages blaming the economy for his poor judgment. Julian emailed me asking for a temporary bridge loan to hire a defense attorney. I did not listen to the voicemails. I deleted the texts. I sent the emails directly to the spam folder. I did not gloat. I did not type out a victorious response to validate their suffering. Silence is the ultimate boundary. I simply severed the cord and let them drift away. Spring arrived in Chesterfield, softening the bitter chill of the winter. The seasonal transition brought a profound sense of peace to the property. The overgrown bushes lining the brick foundation bloomed with vibrant life. Bright pink azaleas burst into color, covering the exact spot where the metal lockbox used to hang. The rusty gas meter was hidden behind a wall of fresh petals. The scars of the ambush faded into the soil. Inside the house, the atmosphere felt light and untroubled. The heavy, suffocating tension that used to accompany my parents' visits was permanently banished. The rooms were filled with natural sunlight and the quiet hum of daytime television. I spent my weekends restoring the sanctuary. I moved into the guest bedroom, updating the paint and organizing the den. Beatrice and I established a new routine built on quiet companionship. On a calm Tuesday afternoon, I walked into the dining room carrying a fresh bakery box. I set the cardboard container on the polished wooden table. The surface was covered by the vintage lace tablecloth. I had spent hours soaking the delicate fabric in a basin of cold water and specialized solvent. The painstaking effort yielded perfect results. The pink frosting stains were eradicated. The melted wax was gone. The heirloom material was washed clean, restored to its original pristine white. I opened the box and pulled out a vanilla cake. It was a simple, single-tier dessert decorated with neat buttercream roses. I sliced 2 generous pieces, placing them onto the good ceramic plates. Beatrice walked into the room, leaning slightly on her wooden cane. She wore a soft lavender sweater, her silver hair brushed neatly away from her face. Her eyes were clear and bright, reflecting the afternoon sun streaming through the bay window. She sat at the head of the table, folding her hands in her lap. She looked down at the cake and offered a warm, genuine smile. "Is there an occasion today, Luna?" she asked. I sat down in the chair next to her, picking up my silver fork. "No, Grandma," I replied. "We are just eating dessert because it is a Tuesday." She nodded, picking up her own fork. She took a slow, deliberate bite of the vanilla sponge, closing her eyes to savor the sugar. The grandfather clock ticked in the hallway, marking the passage of time in a house that belonged solely to us. The arithmetic of the past few months had tested every limit of my endurance, but the final tally was flawless. We retained the asset. We banished the threat. We preserved her dignity. Paperwork does not scream. It does not cry or throw tantrums on the front lawn. It does not manipulate your emotions or post tearful photographs online. It just waits in the dark for someone brave enough to read the fine print. When you arm yourself with the truth, the loudest entitlement in the room shatters against the quiet weight of a recorded fact. If you know someone who needs a reminder to check the legal documents guarding their own relatives, share this story with them today. Stand your ground, stay quiet, stay accurate. I will see you in the next one. When a family collapses, it rarely happens with a sudden detonation. It erodes slowly, over decades, through 1,000 tiny decisions made around kitchen tables and living room sofas. The story of Beatrice and her stolen home is not just a tale of real estate fraud. It is a mirror held up to the deepest flaws in how we raise our children. We look at Susan and Richard and we see monsters. But their descent into financial crime began with a very common parental mistake. They confused indulgence with love. Think about Julian. He was the golden child. In modern American culture, there is an overwhelming temptation to pave a frictionless road for our kids. We want to spare them the pain of failure. Susan and Richard bailed Julian out of every bad business venture. They paid his debts. They shielded him from the natural consequences of his own arrogance. They thought they were protecting him. In reality, they were disarming him. When you refuse to let a child fall, you rob them of the opportunity to learn how to stand back up. Julian grew into a man who believed the world owed him a living. He lacked the emotional awareness to feel empathy for his own grandmother because his parents had spent 30 years teaching him that his comfort superseded everyone else's survival. Entitlement is not an inherent trait. It is a curriculum taught at home. Then you look at Luna. Her parents largely ignored her. They viewed her independence not as a virtue to be nurtured, but as an excuse to redirect their resources toward her brother. Yet Luna survived. She thrived because someone else stepped in to provide the long-term guidance she desperately needed. Beatrice did not coddle her granddaughter. She sat a 12-year-old girl down at a mahogany table and taught her how to balance a ledger. She taught her that numbers do not lie, even when people do. Beatrice instilled a core foundation of objective truth. That is the essence of genuine family responsibility. Raising a capable adult requires teaching them to face hard realities with a steady hand. You do not prepare a child for the world by hiding ugly truths. You prepare them by giving them the tools to audit the darkness. Susan and Richard were obsessed with the aesthetic of the traditional American family. They wanted the manicured lawn, the country club membership, and the holiday photographs from Aspen. They treated family like a commodity. But a traditional household cannot survive on appearances alone. It requires the heavy, unglamorous lifting of honesty and fairness. When parents play favorites, they plant seeds of deep resentment that eventually choke the entire bloodline. Emotional awareness means recognizing your children as distinct individuals with their own sovereign rights, not as extensions of your own ego. Susan saw Beatrice as a bank account and Luna as an obstacle. She lacked the emotional intelligence to see them as human beings. When parents lose that fundamental respect, the home ceases to be a sanctuary. It becomes a battlefield. Let us delve deeper into the concept of fairness. Fairness does not mean dividing every dollar equally. It means applying the same moral standard to every seat at the dining table. When a father looks the other way while his son steals, he is not just failing as a citizen, he is failing as a patriarch. Richard chose passive silence over righteous conflict. He modeled cowardice for his children. A child watches how their parents navigate adversity. If they see a father retreat into the shadows when the truth is demanded, they learn that integrity is optional. If they see a mother weaponize tears to dodge accountability, they learn that manipulation is a valid currency. We are constantly writing the manuals our children will use to build their own lives. Every lie told to avoid a difficult conversation is a brick removed from their future moral foundation. The tragic irony of Susan and Richard is that their desperate attempt to save their son ultimately destroyed him. By pledging their own home as collateral to fund his phantom shell company, they engineered their mutual ruin. This is the ultimate lesson in family responsibility. You cannot construct a secure future for your children on a foundation of theft and deception. The bill always comes due. The universe possesses an uncompromising accounting system. When you teach a child that rules do not apply to them, you send them into a society that will eventually enforce those rules without mercy. Julian lost his business and his freedom because his parents never taught him the value of an honest day of labor. They handed him a stolen crown and watched it crush him. If you find yourself analyzing the dynamics within your own home, evaluating the lessons you impart to the next generation, you are not alone. We explore these quiet domestic battles every single week. If you value stories that strip away the facade and examine the raw architecture of human behavior, subscribe and follow the Revenge Order channel. We build sanctuaries out of the truth. Look closely at the empty chairs in your own home. Consider the silent lessons echoing off your walls. We spend our lives accumulating assets, purchasing real estate, and curating photographs to prove we've built a successful legacy. We assume the things we leave behind will secure our memory. But physical wealth is fragile. The only permanent inheritance you leave your children is the exact mechanism they use to measure right from wrong. A house can be foreclosed. A bank account can be drained. A pristine reputation can vanish in the span of a single afternoon. When the financial safety nets tear and the social standing evaporates, what remains is the moral compass you forged in their minds. As you sit at your own dining table tonight, listening to the quiet rhythm of your household, ask yourself a difficult question. Are you teaching your children how to balance the ledger, or are you just showing them how to hide the missing numbers?